Thanks for everyone for joining. My name's Lois Beach. I'm the Consultancy and Partnership Manager at the Housing LIN. I'll be chairing today's happy hour session. Really excited about this one. Intergenerational practice and work is really something I'm really passionate about. So great to have all the speakers with us. So as I said, we're going to be highlighting the work of Intergenerational England, who are going to share kind of why intergenerational living practice is everyone's business really, and how creating different kind of intergenerational approaches can have really significant kind of social impact. So Charlotte Miller and Emily Abbott, who are the co-founders of Intergenerational England, will be joining us. Their organisation is really dedicated to bridging sort of generational divide and sort of fostering connections between different generations, particularly kind of bridging that gap between kind of practice and policy. So really interested to hear from them. Then we're going to be kind of showcasing some examples of kind of how housing providers and also kind of architects can kind of innovatively kind of create intergenerational designs and community activities. So we've got Mel Leung from InCommon and Sarah Mitten from Clarion Futures to join with us in a joint presentation about their work they've been doing together. So Mel, she's the program manager at InCommon. She's been working there since sort of 2023. She's also kind of previously worked in kind of tech startups, and also previously I think you worked for Fair Share UK charity. That's really she's really passionate about kind of making tech accessible for all ages. And yeah, so I'm really keen to hear from Mel about her experience working with InCommon. So Sarah Mitten was previously the Age-Friendly Communities Manager at Clarion Futures, who was working really closely with InCommon as well as Intergenerational Music Making, who conveniently a nice connection here. Charlotte and Emily kind of also work with, and Sarah is now kind of head of customer engagement at Sovereign Network Group. So thanks, Sarah, for kind of joining us in your new role as well. And then lastly, we're going to kind of have a sort of spotlight on intergenerational design with Amelia Swabby, who's an architectural assistant at P+HS Architects. She's currently working with that practice, kind of looking at kind of intergenerational practices from an architectural standing. So we're really interested to kind of hear about her, I think it's her recent thesis on this kind of design. So very much looking forward to that. So yeah, I'll stop talking and I'll hand over to our first speakers. So we've got Charlotte and Emily will be joining us first. Thank you.
Great.
Wow.
Thank you. And thank you, Sally, for kindly doing the slides for us. Much appreciated. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Charlotte Miller, Director of Intergenerational Music Making and co-founder of Intergenerational England. And I'm also joined here today with Emily Abbott, who is Programme Director for Intergenerational Music Making and co-founder of Intergenerational England. So on the first slide, can
you see that again?
Perfect, Sally. Thank you. Great. Could you kindly go to the next one, please? Thank you. Here is an overview. Perfect. And then we'll start with this one. So where the journey started. So in 2018, Intergenerational Music Making was founded, a unique intergenerational delivery body working with hyper-local communities. Our mission being to develop intergenerational creative health programs tailored to local needs. And these include programs such as intergenerational community hubs. We do a huge amount of youth social action programs, community innovation labs, music therapy sessions, and bespoke community 6 to 8 week projects. We also deliver intergenerational creative health training, mentorship schemes, and volunteer networks. By unlocking creativity in our communities across the UK, IMM, Intergenerational Music Making, offers a place-based collaborative approach to prevention and health creation. The impact on individuals and communities has been profound, from fostering happiness, resilience, and compassion, whilst improving well-being, forging connections, and developing sustainable solutions. Early on, we realised that this approach not only supported individual well-being through emotional and social connections, but it was also bridging gaps across sectors. So linking together housing, health, education, and local councils. By uniting diverse stakeholders, we leverage collective expertise to design services that truly address the needs of all generations. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, as Charlotte said there, it started with that grassroots connection. So really working with communities to understand need and this inclusive approach to tackle a lot of the issues that we see in society. And what we found is that there was this gap between incredible intergenerational work that was happening on the ground from IMM and other organisations like InCommon and across the UK, but it wasn't being recognised outside of those communities as playing a real part in actually how we look at life and how we look at commissioning and building and education across the sectors. So we launched Intergenerational England, which was really to bridge that gap between practice and policy and position intergenerational understanding and that ethos and approach as a key solution to tackle many of the issues we see. So from loneliness to health inequalities, ageism, the housing crisis. And for us, it really goes on beyond the delivery. It's about fostering a cultural shift. We are one of the most age-segregated countries in the world, and that's due to many things. Demographically, we're shifting, globalization, technology, and so we've lost those the value that we place on intergenerational relationships from a community level and a human-to-human level, but also that cross-sector integrated intergenerational way of working. Can I have the next slide, please, Sally? So for us, our core principles sit across these 4 areas. So for us, intergenerational relationships and that social support system. So really creating a network of connection between people across generations, supporting well-being, sense of belonging, communication, empathy, and building, mutual respect and understanding for people of different generations. The second being really understanding the intersectionality, so recognizing how individuals live and those intersecting identities of age and race and gender and socioeconomic status, that someone is not just one part of them, but actually a myriad of complexities and nuances that we really need to recognize. The third being this life course approach. I think for many who are not in this intergenerational world, we would often think it was the 2 polarizing ends of the spectrum. So children and older people. And for us, it is recognizing that it includes all of us. So at every life course, at every life stage, it's about bringing together generations and really looking at that kind of view of aging from childhood right through to older age. And the fourth being intergenerational integrated partnerships. So really recognizing that this is not just about the person-to-person relationship, but how do we build long, sustainable partnerships across generations, and really recognize that, again, someone's house isn't everything, but also their health isn't everything, and everything is intersecting and interlocking. And so to really build solutions that are long-term, inclusive, and successful, we need to focus on that integrated system of working. Can we have the next slide, please, Sally? So for us, we've been developing Intergenerational England for the last 15 to 18 months and really bringing together cross sectors to understand where this sits within the bigger policy influencing and strategic development world. So Care England and UK Youth and Age UK and social care to really come together and place this at the heart of how we look at communities and society as a whole. Can we have the next slide, please? And we developed our theory of change, which focused on 3 specific pillars. So looking at that strategic support and really embedding intergenerational understanding at the core of how we build communities and commission, developing research and innovating both global and national research to develop this evidence base, and advocacy work. So recognizing that, as I mentioned, this cultural shift and really placing this at the heart of public interest as well. Thank you, Sally.
So in August 2024, we carried out a YouGov poll survey, and 86% of the UK adults agreed with the statement that mixing with people of different age groups, generations, can generate mutual respect between generations. And also 83% of the UK adults agreed with the statement that mixing with people of different age groups can reduce age-based stereotypes. Next slide, please, Sally. Thank you. Generational discourse is occupying a huge amount of the current conversation, from politics to the housing crisis, workplace productivity to healthcare and education. The evidence and stats, which you can see on this slide, really speak volumes. The residential separation of age groups is a widespread issue and is happening in both urban and rural areas in London and elsewhere. A lot of these trends raise concerns about potential intergenerational tension and have implications for the development of policies designed to promote social cohesion between age groups. And you can see on the screen, children across the UK currently have only a 5% chance of living near someone age 65 or over. So the urgency for addressing generational cohesion has never been more pressing. Demographic shifts, including age population, growing urbanization, are really altering the social landscape. Meanwhile, opportunities for meaningful intergenerational interactions are diminishing, and further segregating age groups and exacerbating issues, for example, such as loneliness, social isolation, and health disparities are very present. So by fostering cross-generational engagement, we have the opportunity to dismantle age-based stereotypes, improve well-being, and enhance community resilience. Intergenerational work, it is happening all around us, but what we're passionate about is how do we start to really place value on intergenerational approaches and interactions, so making the accidental much more intentional. Next slide, please. Thank you, Sally. So the framework and the ecosystem, well, an intergenerational approach is a deliberate and thoughtful strategy that harnesses the connections between and across people and across the life course, but whilst also putting emphasis on the systems and structures that surround them. It is taking a life course approach to truly understand how people live, age, learn, and develop as they move through the life, and the internal and external factors that influence this. And you can see on here the framework breakdown, the central concept being that inclusive life course approach. Next slide, please, Sally. Thank you. On this slide here are the enablers, further broken down, including governments, workplace, communities, individuals, services and systems, and researchers. Next slide. Thank you, Sally.
I'm going to just whiz through these final bits because I'm aware time is ticking, and you're going to hear some great examples and other kind of supporting evidence as we go through this. But as Charlotte mentioned there, for us is about this collaborative approach. How do we collectively reimagine how we live together? And from a housing perspective, really implementing intergenerational strategies from the point of design development through to commissioning and operations, looking at the built environment, those relationships as people age. So embedding this culture and this understanding of intergenerational approaches right from the get-go. You can see there that the government have pledged to build 1.5 million homes. So how do we collectively look at that balance between demand and innovation for intergenerational success? Can I have the next slide, please? So we're doing some work at the minute in partnership with HACT and Clarion Futures and SNG, really looking at how do we build an evidence base around intergenerational understanding from a housing perspective, but also a real cross-sector understanding of the social value of intergenerational housing. And this comes in a two-phase review. So we're doing some discovery at the minute and developing a deeper understanding of what's already existing and what do we know, and then building a social value framework to really support in evidence basing this area. And this is a collaborative piece of work, and we invite people who are interested, whether from architects, health, housing, care, education, whoever you are, to come and be part of this group and a part of this movement to really embed this understanding, this ethos of intergenerational approach and community development as we move forward. Can I get the last slide, please, Sally? Wonderful. So we throw a lot of you there at you there, but hopefully Mel from InCommon and Amelia and Sarah will really kind of place it into context and some tangible examples. But if you are interested in this area, and it's brilliant to see so many of you here, then we do invite you to get involved. We're looking at that policy influencing piece, really championing co-design spaces that unite generations, and looking for partners to really help scale and advocate for where this sits within the greater and the bigger picture. Wonderful. Thank you all very much for your time. I'll pass back to Lois.
Brill, thank you both. That's really great to kind of set a bit of a scene there in terms of kind of some of those stats around kind of intergenerational connections and how much that's happening in the kind of changing landscape, and then also to kind of show, you know, what you guys are trying to achieve to kind of mitigate some of those. So yeah, really great to kind of set the scene. Thank you so much. All right, I'll hand over to Mel and Sarah then, who will kind of hopefully give a bit of a, yeah, some of that kind of practical examples of how this is happening. So Brill, over to you, Mel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lois, and thanks, Emily and Charlotte. I don't know how I'm going to follow that. Let me share my screen and hopefully, can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, I can see your slides if you want to just make them bigger, and then hopefully, yeah, that's fab.
Amazing. Thanks, Lois. So hi, everyone. My name is Mel Leung, and I'm really, really excited to join you all today. I'm the Empower Programme Manager at InCommon, and we're a charity that brings generations together. Our vision is for a future where generations can come together in a connected and inclusive society. Emily and Charlotte have already done a really brilliant job at helping to set that scene as to why intergenerational connection is so important. And as Emily mentioned, Britain is one of the most age-segregated countries in the world. And another stat is that, unfortunately, negative attitudes about age can begin to form really early in children, as young as 6 years old. And ageism and age segregation are just both really harmful for everyone, all age groups, but especially older people that live in age-specific housing and have limited connections to family or the wider community. So InCommon, what do InCommon do to try and combat that? We create opportunities for young people and older people to learn from one another, fostering mutual inspiration, growth, and a stronger sense of community. And we do that through 3 programs. We've got our Connect program, which is our flagship program in London, and we bring primary school age children together with their neighbours in retirement homes to learn and build friendships together. We've got our social action program, which brings both primary school and secondary school ages to actively make a positive difference on the issues that affect their local communities and wider society. And then our third program is Empower, which is our newest program, which I manage, and we actually launched earlier this year. And this supports older people's housing providers and schools across the UK to deliver their own safe and impactful intergenerational activities. The program's built on our experience as facilitators and the 7 years of experience within InCommon for directly delivering intergenerational activities in London. We remove the barriers that we know time-poor staff at schools and retirement schemes can really put them off from taking part in intergenerational activities. And we really just we know the benefits and want to really encourage as many people as possible to benefit from intergenerational connection. So we set the project up. We matched the retirement scheme with their local primary school, usually within a 15-minute walk, so that the school doesn't need to do any additional planning, for example, about transport, and get them really excited about participating in a locally owned project. We provide assurance on topics such as risk and safeguarding, and use our experience as facilitators to support school teachers to lead the intergenerational activity instead of it requiring a member of the InCommon team. And we provide the framework for regular visits, usually monthly for a 12-year programme. And the visits take place at the communal space of the retirement scheme and last up to 1 hour. And that's really to make it as accessible for residents who would like to take part. We have developed an online platform to make it really easy for teachers and retirement scheme staff to deliver their activities. The platform helps them to easily schedule dates, access tried and tested activity worksheets that we ourselves use for our own programs to run their activities, promotional materials such as posters to make it easy for engaging residents to take part, and then also the ability to report on the impact of the intergenerational activity. And by reducing that admin, we want schools and schemes to be able to focus on enjoying the benefits of the intergenerational connections. So what are some of those benefits? So earlier this year, HousingLIN actually launched an evaluation of some of the social and economic impact of Empower and our intergenerational activities. So I've pulled out some of their headline social impact from their evaluation, and we can also share the fuller report with you after or in the chat. So some of those benefits were improves health and wellbeing outcomes for older participants, boosts social and emotional learning for younger participants, builds community cohesion, tackles ageism, and improves workplace satisfaction. So similarly to what Emily and Charlotte were saying, it's about involving all ages. And, you know, we got really good feedback from the school teachers and the retirement scheme staff who are also involved in the project. And I also wanted to share some of the feedback that we got from the individual participants as well as part of that evaluation. So one of our older participants mentioned the impact on their well-being, and it really just brings to life some of the benefits of intergenerational connection and work. And they said that without the children, they wouldn't speak to anyone apart from the TV, and the children really made them laugh, which we love to hear about. Also from school teachers, we hear from teachers like Rianne, who said that the workshops really helped introduce children, give the children the opportunity to learn from their older neighbours. And, you know, sometimes they're really pleasantly surprised again, which we really love to really combat that kind of any ageism or any kind of stereotypes that they may have. And then we've also heard from retirement scheme managers like Dee about how the project really helped to build a stronger community for their residents, as the residents they can bond with each other as they've got a shared experience after the children have left. And then finally, here's a snapshot of our impact from last year. We've actually got our latest impact report. It will be published very shortly. So Empower has been really exciting for us because it's allowed us to scale that intergenerational impact outside of London. And in the past year, we've been able to connect generations across the country, including Warwickshire and Sheffield. And this term, it's been really great to start new projects in Manchester and Nottingham. So if you're a housing provider and are interested in exploring how InCommon could support intergenerational activity at your schemes, I'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And I'll hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Mel. So hi, great to meet everybody. I'm Sarah Mitten. I'm the Head of Customer Engagement at Sovereign Network Group. And I just wanted to talk about why it's been so important for social housing providers to be involved in this movement towards better intergenerational practice. So I'm just going to share my slides, which were working a moment ago. So
they seem to be starting to be shared, so hopefully they'll arrive soon, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're there.
Typically. Amazing. Perfect. Slick.
You might just, you might just want to make them a bit bigger. Oh, yeah, no, you've done it. Sorry, it's just a bit delayed. Perfect. All good.
Sorry, guys. Didn't even do a practice. So I was just going to talk a little bit about intergenerational connections and the role of social housing. And I guess here I'm talking both with my Sovereign Network Group hat on, but also previously having worked really closely with the team at Clarion Futures as their age-friendly communities manager to explore how we really embed intergenerational connections across our communities. So the purpose of Sovereign Network Group is to provide good and affordable homes that provide a foundation for a better life for all of our residents. And this just gives you a little bit of a picture of kind of who we are as a social housing provider. So we're the 6th largest housing association. We recently went through a merger between Sovereign and Network Homes. And so we now own around 85,000 homes mainly across the south of England. And what I wanted to highlight is that we're an organisation that are absolutely more than bricks and mortar, and one of the ways that's been reflected is the setup of the new Community Foundation, which will invest 100 million into communities over the next 10 years. And what is really at the heart of that is making sure that we are creating communities that are connected, both across a number of demographics, but importantly across age. So you can see here a little bit about kind of the spread of the housing that we have. Around 210,000 people call a Sovereign Network home their home, and we have a real spread across London, Hertfordshire and Southern England. And I think that, like, the thing I wanted to highlight here, that as a social housing provider, we do often provide housing to the most vulnerable people in society, and that is across the age spectrum. But what is really important is, as a housing provider, we can play that wider role, not only in providing a roof over someone's head, but creating a place where they can thrive. So the Community Foundation will be investing, as I said, 100 million over the next 10 years. And I think what's really important is that the approach is around how we do build on the strengths that already exist in communities and the fantastic people that live in those communities, both younger and older residents. And we want to empower those residents to take action in their own space and place so that it feels both like home within the four walls, but also within their community. So I want to talk a little bit about how we have approached this as a housing association, but also more broadly for a sector. And I thought what was quite important, and I realise I've repeated a statistic that Emily mentioned here, but children do now have 5% chance of living, of having someone aged 65 or over living in their area, compared to 15% in 1991. So there's a real change in terms of what places look like in terms of age. We are living in an increasingly age segregated society, and that raises a number of challenges for housing providers. So we do have more age polarised communities. There's a brilliant report which I can send, I'll put in the chat in a minute, by the University of St Andrews, and they talk a lot about how housing affordability and accessibility is a huge challenge in communities, young people struggling to get on the property ladder or to access affordable housing. A challenge is the bricks and mortar side of things, and I know we're going to talk, Amelia's going to talk in a little bit about an architecture's perspective on this, but building age-friendly communities can be a real challenge as well. Housing providers are often beholden to local authorities' planning rules and restrictions, and we do build in an age-segregated way, and there's work to be done about how we create multi-generational communities through our planning. A challenge is like when budgets are tight, how we continue investing in community connection through projects and spaces, and how we really tackle some of the negative perceptions that people that between age groups, and sometimes that plays out for housing associations in things like antisocial behaviour. And we did a lot of work when I was at Clarion around how we differentiate between what is antisocial behaviour and what is actually just child play. And then finally, and a real kind of core aspect of my current job, is looking at how we do create spaces for multi-generational voices to be heard. A huge push through the new consumer standards is transparency and influence, and making sure that everybody has a say on their housing. And it's going to be a real priority for housing providers moving forward. So I thought I'd just talk quickly about how we've collaborated as a sector to come together around predominantly youth social action, and worked really closely over a number of years with Mel and Emily and Charlotte and Lois to really kind of push this forward and make sure that it's an approach for the sector, not just for SNG and Clarion, but for all housing providers operating within social housing communities. So what is intergenerational social action? We have been working with partners up and down the country who are supporting younger and older people to come together to deliver youth social action. So that is essentially about those generations coming together to identify challenges that their communities face and creating the responses to those challenges together. So really collaborating and co-designing projects and solutions. And this is a way that's been proven over the years that we've been running this, of tackling age segregation and connecting communities across generations. And I think that when you bring people together, not only do they share experiences, but you do come up with the best solutions to challenges that are faced within localities. So this is the model that we have been working on, and I should say that this has been a true partnership between Sovereign Network Group, Clarion Futures and Places for People. Clarion have really tried to lead the way on this for a number of years and developed the model and iterated it to the place it is today. But in terms of our intergenerational social action work, we've come together to look at like lots of different ways that we can have touch points with both younger and older people living in social housing communities to ensure that they can have a say and take action where they live. So we've been running innovation labs with intergenerational music making. InCommon have supported to manage an intergenerational board, so that actually it really is younger and older people leading the way, even at that more strategic level. And then kind of core to the programme is our ambassador approach, which Clarion have been running for around a decade now, but it is about how people come together in their localities to set up their own projects. And we've been really pleased to work with InCommon again on the digital platform, which will hopefully sustain this work beyond the funding that we were able to receive from IWIL. So just to finish off, I think that there is so many brilliant and driven organisations out there that are really trying to fill this space and make sure that it's the top of all sectors' agendas, not just housing. So the brilliant work of HousingLIN and really kind of finding best practice examples and bringing all the people who are here together today to talk about the things that we're doing. And Intergenerational England, SNG have been working really closely with Intergenerational England to again look at how housing are part of that conversation on raising the profile of intergenerational practice. And finally, HACT, we've been working really closely with Clarion Futures again on looking at how we better measure the impact of intergenerational practice, because I think it's really important when you're looking for funding or when you're proving the power of the work that you're doing is to be able to have some really tangible measures. So we're really excited about what that space brings over the next few months and years. But thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Lois.
Brill. Thanks so much, Sarah, and yeah, thank you for giving that kind of provider perspective. Really, really helpful. And I think I definitely agree with the comment in the chat where Hannah said it's worth repeating that kind of 5% stack, as it's a really kind of shocking one. It's really powerful. So yeah, no worries about repeating that at all. Okay, I will tell everyone also if you've got any questions to put them into the Q&A boxes after this. Next speaker would be having a Q&A discussion. So if you've got anything you want to kind of ask, please do put that in the Q&A box. But I'll hand over to Amelia now.
Great.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Lois. And thanks to Emily and Charlotte and Mel and Sarah for those wonderful presentations so far. It's going to be quite difficult to lead on from that, but I'll give it my best shot. So hi everyone, I'm Amelia Swaby. I'm an architectural assistant at P+HS Architects. I'm currently undertaking my master's qualifications via the degree apprenticeship with Northumbria University. So that means I work full-time alongside my studies. And with over 4 years of experience at P+HS, I've worked on several later living development projects. And because of this, I've developed a really keen interest in housing solutions for the ageing population. So I chose to hone in on this topic as part of my written thesis. And when conducting research into retirement housing options, it became really apparent that most, if not all of them, built today are age segregated, intended for like over 55s. Therefore, my research paper, A Village Apart, was created to study the effects of age segregated housing and investigate if we should be looking deeper into intergenerational approaches to design and create more holistic and sustainable environments for people to age in. So to dive into the research, there are many reasons as to why age segregation occurs, whether that be for development and socialization purposes, such as segregating children based on age in school, or more relevant to my research, due to specific age segregated housing. And we're seeing such a divide between the ages, as said by the other speakers today. And it's continuing to grow within the UK due to lack of meeting places and the rural and urban housing split. So adding more age segregated environments to the mix is just not helping that situation at all. So you might be thinking, why would we design age segregated retirement housing in the first place? Well, simply put, it is because they offer a lot of benefits to the residents, especially in terms of care and support and security, because a lot of these homes that are designed, they are designed with those specific needs in mind. Specialist housing, such as extra care, it can give people that independence well into later life to allow them to stay in their homes for longer. And there's also that sense of community within these developments where like-minded people can kind of come together. However, there are some major downsides to age segregated housing, and that can impact on a person's physical and mental well-being. It can lead to loneliness, health anxiety, social isolation, and even has strong links to ageism. So how can these spaces be designed differently to prevent these issues? I cast my net wide and I looked into different approaches to intergenerational living in both Asia and Europe to see what other countries are doing. In Asia, 2 case studies jumped out at me. The first one is development named Kampong Admiralty in Singapore, and the second is Kotoin in Japan. Kampong Admiralty is like a one-stop shop approach where many functions can come together, such as housing for the elderly, commercial units, medical centre, childcare centre, and kind of communal gardens to create this big intergenerational hub. And then on the other hand, Kotoin is Japan's first intergenerational care home, and that shares its site with a nursery, and it has those both contrasting age groups coming together each day to interact and play. And in Europe, there are two innovative schemes which see students and young adults and older people co-living in one apartment block or care home. Both schemes have a reduction in rent or even free rent for the younger residents in exchange for time spent on neighbourly activities, which could be things like shared meals, assisting with care, answering queries, or just engaging in general activities. So what about the UK? Do we have anything like this? Well, yes and no. Through research and approaches from the UK, it was apparent that intergenerational retirement living, it's quite a novel idea to us in comparison to other countries. And we've been quite slow to realise the benefits of intergenerational connection. So the schemes and developments that we have are few and far between, but those that we do have, as shown here on this slide, are a huge step in the right direction. So how can architects design more intergenerationally? Well, as part of my research, I interviewed a total of 8 participants from across a variety of sectors, including healthcare professionals, housing developers, adult social care experts, architects, policy advocates, and current retirement residents to try and gain a more holistic picture on how we can design better environments, not only for the ageing population, but for society as a whole. And it's actually an amazing coincidence that Charlotte, who we heard from earlier, was a participant in this research. So huge thanks to you, Charlotte. Your help on this was incredibly appreciated. So when I posed the question of potential problems that we have with the age-segregated retirement model, there were a lot of opinions on this. From a healthcare perspective, age segregation leads to both a physical and mental decline in health. Without an active lifestyle and not experiencing intergenerational connection, a person's more likely to develop a fear of falling and even become more prone to falls and injuries due to aging faster. And from a policy and design point of view, creating appropriate age-segregated retirement housing, it's difficult due to the diversity within that age bracket. 55 and over is such a huge group, so catering for everyone under one roof is extremely difficult. And therefore, like one member that I interviewed from a local council commented, 55 and over just doesn't work, and instead it should be based on needs and not age. And from the perspective of residents, age-segregated housing actually caused some hostility towards younger people. As one gentleman told me, that when his grandson came to visit him one day, one of his neighbours confronted him and said, you're not welcome here, you shouldn't be here due to his age. And then the kind of benefits of intergenerational connection, I know we've definitely touched on throughout the wonderful presentations seen so far. But when I discussed this with participants, it was clear to see that most, if not all of them, agreed that bridging that gap between the ages is incredibly important. From an adult social care perspective, having intergenerational specialist homes can keep families together and it can build respect. One member from a local council described a situation in where a former resident of hers who suffered from MS and was in her 40s was able to move into an intergenerational extra care facility, and her husband's lives drastically improved because of that. And when I interviewed Charlotte on this topic, and as she mentioned earlier in this session, there's over an 80% beneficial impact of intergenerational connection, especially around mental health. And that is just incredible. And it proves that intergenerational connection is so important in everyday life. So what might be stopping us from going that extra mile intergenerationally? Well, from talking to residents, they had a lot of reservations living with younger people, and it's due to that lack of common ground or fear of crime. From a design perspective, the barriers posed were how can we bring different spaces together and make them work? However, I think Charlotte best summed this up when I spoke with her, as she mentioned that it comes down to it being an educational piece. We need to shift people's attitudes and misconceptions and push the change. And as said by a local council member, if we can prove some of this works, then we have that opportunity. So as a way to wrap up these findings, I went to the drawing board and I came up with 8 different design considerations on how architects and planners can create intergenerational and sustainable housing. Number 1 is to have cafes and commercial elements in extra care or specialist housing. So it brings people in, it doesn't just have people housed in them. Number 2 is to make sure there's clear wayfinding around sites and buildings so they can be used easily and enjoyed by everybody. Number 3 is to incorporate a nursery or early learning facility with adjacencies to potential age-segregated environments to create that intergenerational connection without as much as a physical barrier. Number 4 is to offer a mix of tenure to encourage people to downsize or relocate to housing that's more suitable for their needs. You know, that could be family homes, bungalows, apartments, right-size units of varying size and bedroom numbers. Number 5 is to have communal gardens that everyone can enjoy, and it creates a space for neighbours to come and connect with each other. Number 6 is to ensure that there are access to amenities, healthcare and public transport, because that is so important. 7 is having frequent resting points around the site and within the buildings so that it's more accessible to everybody and it reduces people's anxieties. And then finally, number 8 is to have a communal outdoor space. Oftentimes, indoor space can be limited, so having that larger outdoor area can allow for these big groups to come together, whether that be a class of children and some retirement residents, or maybe a hobby group. They can all come together without having to worry about that space requirement. And although this research has held a very design-led focus, I would also urge policymakers and local councils to strive to provide more sustainable age-diverse neighbourhoods and move away from this age-segregated retirement model. Specialist housing shouldn't have an age limit. It should instead be able to be opened up to all ages that require specialist care needs. That'll encourage more intergenerational connection, and it'll hopefully shift people's perceptions and tackle ageism once and for all. And then once we start looking at reducing age-segregated housing and we focus on building spaces that people of all ages can inhabit, only then will we as architects truly be able to design with a more intergenerational lens. So if you want to read more about this research, as I know it's been a very brief fly through, then you can find my full research paper on the HousingLIN's website under the resource library. And that's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Brill, thank you so much, Amelia. That was really fantastic. And yeah, we often see in our world that kind of tension between, you know, how to kind of create intergenerational extra care housing, and actually some really, really great examples have been seen where people do live intergenerationally in those settings. I think recently I heard about an individual moving in with their older mother who had learning disabilities. It was a really good like transitional kind of process for them to kind of be in that sort of supported setting, and then also, obviously when their mother passes away, they'll be, you know, in a setting where they're able to live independently. So thank you so much for kind of sharing your perspectives. I'll hand over to the Q&A, or go to the Q&A session now. Thanks everyone for putting your questions into the Q&A box. I think what I'll do is we've had some questions around kind of some showcasing some kind of examples. So particularly in relation to kind of examples of where like senior living is co-located with things like a creche. And I know I'm aware of kind of some providers that do that. For example, the Extra Care Charitable Trust, one of their sites in Birmingham. I know the HousingLIN, we had one of our annual conference sessions there a couple of years ago, and actually some residents who effectively had set up a creche in one of their schemes presented on kind of their experience doing that and the kind of sense of community it created within the extra care village, as well as kind of the benefits to the young people that were able to kind of engage with kind of those living in the senior scheme. And then I think there's another comment around kind of multi-generational developments, particularly for those people living up north. And I think I'm aware of a couple. So I think there's in Newcastle, the Centre for Ageing and Vitality, I think, is a kind of a new proposal for intergenerational living within Newcastle. And then I think there's another project in Stockport. It's St Thomas Gardens, which was on a former kind of hospital site that's looking to create an all-age residential scheme, essentially with sort of homes for all ages alongside kind of a dementia care unit on site. So we can put some of those links in the chat. I don't know, Amelia, if there are any kind of other examples of multi-generational. You've obviously highlighted some in your report that Sally's put in the chat, but if there were any other kind of examples or that you wanted to draw attention to in relation to kind of UK-based multi-generational living, or that kind of kind of a co-location of kind of a creche or children's kind of services. If you're aware of any, please, obviously feel free to mention. You can always go on to another question if you need a bit of time.
Yeah, that's fine. One that kind of jumped out at me from a UK perspective was Apples and Honey Nursery in London. It's the UK's first kind of integrated care home where it has a nursery on site, and having that kind of immediate positioning between the two, it's just so helpful because you don't have to have that issue with finding transport for the children or vice versa. So yeah, that is a really great scheme, and I would urge people to look into that one. That's great.
Brill, thank you. That's really helpful. And I'm sure Sally will be kind of searching that and putting that in the chat if there's anyone that wants to link to that as well. Okay, we've had some other questions. I'm kind of going to focus on the ones that have kind of been voted initially. I think we had a question from Jane at East Lindsey around kind of any examples of kind of intergenerational work that engages not just kind of with what we might typically consider your sort of very young and very old, but any kind of work engaging adults of all ages. I don't know whether any speakers want to kind of highlight any particular examples in relation to that. I think Sean, I can see you sort of nodding your head, so maybe you would, or I don't know if Mel, that's something that InCommon is sort of thinking about, how to actually engage with even older age school children as well. Charlotte, sorry, I'll let you go.
No, yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and Emily sort of touched on it in our presentation. I think sometimes it can be presented that it's kind of bringing children into a care home, or it's kind of, the young and the old, kind of thinking about those extremes. And actually it's about thinking about it like the life course. So our projects, we do intergenerational projects where we have 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds coming to our sessions. Yeah, we have a real mixture of age groups, but specifically looking, when we go into local areas, we look at the need. It might be at the moment in Manchester, we're working with a cohort of between 40 to kind of early 50s who have high levels of depression, mental health. And bringing them together with some university students, an intergenerational project to improve mental health well-being, create more of a connected kind of localized communities. And that's one example. Emily, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I just think it goes back to that last question as well in terms of design, and I think there's some incredible examples as we talked about around nurseries within care settings. But I think again it goes bigger than that. So for example, we work a lot up in Sheffield where we're looking at university students who are living with older isolated people in the community, or looking at kind of family and residential care and how you supporting that built environment, so bringing together family residential care with maybe extra care sites. So I think it goes beyond that kind of, as we said, that stigmatized way of thinking of intergenerational approaches, and actually one that is very inclusive of all of us and very respectful of specific hyperlocal need and that demand. And I think that's the balance that we're always trying to contend with is there's a huge demand, there's a huge issue, and we're living in a housing crisis at the minute with prices rising and not enough housing, and there's millions of children that are currently not in housing. So there's a huge amount of demand, but I think it's how we look at that long-term legacy and sustainability piece to build housing and environments where generations can come together and from that build these support networks that actually support mental health and well-being and loneliness crisis. So there's a real kind of trajectory of change that I think first starts with recognizing that we're all part of it.
Thanks everyone, that's really helpful. I think Amelia, we've got another question here that's
Sorry, Lois. Sorry, I was just going to add. Sorry, I was just going to just add for that previous question. So we've got InCommon. I've got an interesting partnership and project that we're running that I hadn't actually mentioned, in my presentation, that fits this in terms of the different age groups, and actually is interesting because it's away from like housing specific environment. So we've got a really exciting partnership in London with the Advocacy Academy. And so they're a youth organising movement, and they're based in South London, training young people in skills that are needed to change the world around them. So more kind of that social action kind of style. And I'll put a link in the chat, but what's interesting about that is that it's open to all ages. We have said that, you know, we're interested in hearing particularly from those that are over 55s and under 18s, but it is open for everyone, and it's going to be free 10 session course over the next few months. So yeah, it's just something a little bit different, and it's just introducing people to the idea of you know, conflict resolution, how to hold good meetings, and yeah, just opening them to the idea that an opportunity that they can create change themselves. So I'll just put that in the chat.
Thanks, Mel. That's really helpful. Sarah, I see you've also got your hand up, so please, if you wanted to mention something.
I was just going to add that I think in terms of when we think about age-friendly approaches, sort of repeating what Charlotte said, we are thinking about like life course approaches to communities, which does encompass all ages. And I know that certainly when we were working as a sector thinking about what age-friendly communities meant to social housing organisations, it is about how we work with our residents and our communities as young as possible, so that they do avoid age-related crisis at whatever point in their lives. So I think, you know, we probably are talking multi-generationally when we're thinking about connected communities, but we know that there's perhaps even more sort of segregation when we're thinking about both ends of the age spectrum. But I think it's absolutely such an important point. And I think if you look at like World Health Organization age-friendly communities approach and cities approach, that very much is thinking about life course approaches to society and communities. So yeah, I just wanted to say that from a housing perspective, we feel the same.
Oh, thanks. And I've seen there's another question that's come in that maybe Charlotte and Emily, you might be kind of best to answer, because it's effectively asking around, is there a kind of standard benefits measurement framework that already exists for kind of intergenerational programs? And I guess that's really crucial to your work in terms of trying to set that up. So I don't know if you just want to sort of say a little bit more about kind of the process. I know obviously you've covered that a bit in your presentation, but yeah, just to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, as of now, there isn't a set measure that specifically looks at the benefit of intergenerational. I think that's due to it's very complex. It's, you know, there's many layers, and it's hugely multifaceted in terms of those dyads that you're bringing together in a space, but also the ripple effect of impact. But as we mentioned in the presentation, we are working with SNG and HACT and Clarion to build a kind of an intergenerational social value measure to really help frame what this looks like, and all of the different kind of tools and impacts that sit with under that umbrella. There's a huge amount of evidence out there, not to get me wrong, you know, there's loads of research in this area with some very clear gaps in our understanding, I think, when it comes to that mutual benefit, the community development benefit. But yeah, I think that's where the kind of the issue is. And actually, as Amelia pointed out, internationally, there's some really good examples of this work. And globally, there's a huge amount that we can learn, because this is also a very culturally embedded way of living, way of building, way of, you know, being, that we've lost in our Western way. And so actually there's a huge amount of learning that we can take, but actually having a specific metric. And when it comes to evidence-based, when you get the developers on the phone or the commissioners, we need that evidence. And so, yeah, hopefully this will help fill that gap.
Real, thank you. Yeah, and I think, you know, from a HousingLIN perspective, we obviously were involved in kind of doing a evaluation with InCommon around kind of the benefits of their intergenerational activities. And, you know, obviously during that process, it was obvious that there wasn't sort of a standardized approach, and we had to be, you know, we sort of created sort of some of those social value measures just based on kind of what we've learned elsewhere. So having that tool will be extremely helpful for others, I'm sure, when trying to kind of, you know, demonstrate the benefits, and then particularly when that's linked to kind of like things like funding and the like. So really looking forward to that coming out. So thank you. Okay, I've had a statement. I think Tony Johnson's got a sort of statement around, you know, could we all agree that we should persuade the political parties to adopt a policy of moving towards affordable housing for all? I think his point is around kind of, I guess, house prices and the kind of earnings and that sort of intergenerational inequality in relation to sort of tenure, I guess. And I guess is that something that everyone in the panel would agree with in terms of housing? How important is that, I guess, in terms of that intergenerational divide and bridging that gap, I guess, is the sort of question. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on Tony's point.
I can
It's a very strong one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go on,
very
Emily.
quickly, and I think Amelia made a really good point. There's an education awareness gap, and it is cross-sector, it's cross levels. Everyone needs to recognise the value in intergenerational approaches and thinking in this way for us to really make an impact. We can all sit here and bang on the wall, but actually, it's those people with the decision-making powers that need to recognise that working in this way, building in this way, can have a real long-term impact on people's lives. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We've got, I think this is obviously a number of you put this sort of stat was in your slides, but does anyone know in terms of the stat around kind of that 5% of children, whether it means kind of what that definition around nearby and in their area meant in terms of the stat that's used, in terms of the number of older people living next to them? Do we know the sort of what that refers to, or is it? I think it's probably in their like local neighbourhood, I would have assumed. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that. If not, we can always follow that up with Neil afterwards. It's helpful. Yeah. Okay, we've got 2 minutes to go, and I can see probably Robin Darton asking a question around, and it's quite a tricky question around kind of extra care and retirement and integrated retirement communities. So often there's kind of questions there around kind of cost and service charges, and I guess that being, obviously occasionally it can be quite expensive to live in extra care housing or in integrated retirement communities. I wonder if his questions is around, do intergenerational developments have similar or more complicated issues? I guess some of the intergenerational, like deliberate examples have been around kind of supporting younger people and older people to live together, potentially for more, in a more kind of cost beneficial way for the young individual who might, live with an older person for reduced rent in kind, for giving, a bit of time to that individual to support them. I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts around kind of some of the kind of complexities around intergenerational developments and how they can be kind of mitigated. I don't know, Amelia, whether anything kind of sprung up in your research around, I guess the sort of, potential costs around that and how it's met by individuals living there.
Yeah, unfortunately, during my research, I didn't really touch on much of the costs. But one member of a local council, it was actually South Tyneside Council that I spoke with, did mention that they have intergenerational specialist housing because it's not age segregated, and it works. Because like they mentioned, somebody who suffered from MS but was in the 40s was able to live with her husband who didn't have any care needs, but they were obviously under that 55 bracket. So it does work, and I assume it would probably be a similar issue with the cost because extra care housing, it is expensive. I think that is a major turn off for people to even move into these developments, because I know, for example, my grandparents, they're in their kind of mid to late 70s now, and I've mentioned to them, do you think you'd ever move to sheltered housing? And it's just met with an absolute no, I can't afford it. So it is definitely, that is such a difficult thing, and I think we should be looking more into the adult social care sector, potentially with this new government. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know too much about pricing.
That's helpful anyway. Thank you very much. I guess it sort of comes round to that kind of what we were talking about earlier around kind of being a bit more flexible in relation to kind of extra care and allocating that not just based on age but on kind of need. So thank you. I'm conscious there are quite a number of other questions and things in the chat, but we have come to the end of our time, and I probably just need to tell you a little bit about what's happening next week in Happy Hour. So we've got another session next week during Happy Awareness Week. So that's a collaboration between Winkworth Sherwood solicitors and West Body Arcadia architects. They're going to be sort of talking around the sort of climate for growth in relation to the national planning policy framework, particularly delivering kind of specialist housing. So that kind of government commitment to building 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years, and that the sort of, I guess, the implications of that in relation to planning. So do join us next week perhaps Sally's helpfully put the link in the chat again. But I will draw this session to a close. And lastly, just really big thank you to all of our speakers who joined us today. Really appreciate you. And you'll see the positive chat comments in the chat about your presentations. They're really fabulous. Really great to have this discussion going. But yeah, please do stay connected with the Housing LIN to learn more about intergenerational living as well. The slides will be available and the recording later this week. So thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lois. Bye.